The bridge of the UES Defiance hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Lee Taman studied the star charts floating before him. The massive human warship drifted through space like a sleeping giant, its dark hull reflecting the distant light of alien suns. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with the practiced ease of veterans who had seen too many battles and won them all. Commander Park Ji-ho approached with careful steps, a data pad clutched in his hands like it contained poison. His face bore the expression of a man who had to deliver news that would change everything. The other crew members glanced up from their work, sensing the tension that always preceded important moments. "Admiral, we have received a priority transmission from the Galactic Council," Ji-ho said, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. He held out the data pad as if it might explode. Taman took the device without looking away from the star. Charts. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, reading the formal words that carried the weight of 12 alien civilizations. The message was written in the flowery language that the Council preferred, full of ceremonies and traditions that humans found ridiculous. "They want me to appear before them," Taman said after a long moment. His voice carried no surprise, only the calm acceptance of a man who had been expecting this day for months. Alone and unarmed. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's systems. Every crew member had stopped their work to listen. They all knew what this meant. The aliens had finally grown tired of watching humanity expand across the galaxy without asking permission. Captain Kim Nara materialized on the main screen, her image transmitted from the escort vessel Soul's Pride. Her short black hair framed, a face that had been hardened by years of combat, and her dark eyes flashed with anger as she spoke. "Admiral, this is obviously a trap," she said, her words sharp and direct. "They want to separate you from the fleet so they can make demands without facing our weapons. We should decline this summons and make them come to us, Lieutenant Choi." Minyo looked up from his communications station, his young face pale with concern. "Sir, the message specifically states that any military escort will be considered an act of aggression. They want you to come to their space completely defenseless." Taman continued reading the formal document, his expression unchanged. The Council had chosen their words carefully, wrapping threats in diplomatic language. They spoke of humanity's unauthorized expansion and failure to respect established galactic law as if humans were children who had broken some sacred rule. "They believe we are a young species that can be bullied into submission," Taman said, finally looking up from the datapad. "They think that by isolating me from our ships, they can force humanity to accept their demands." Dr. Yu Hana appeared on a secondary screen, her transmission coming from Earth's Xenobiology Research Center. Her laboratory coat was stained with the evidence of long hours spent studying alien biology, and her tired eyes held the weight of knowledge that few humans possessed. "Admiral, my research teams have been monitoring Council communications for weeks," she said, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. "They have been planning this confrontation since our colonies began expanding beyond the Outer Rim. They see us as a threat to their established order." Major Kang Siwoo stepped forward from his position near the tactical displays. His uniform bore the insignia of the Human Military Academy, where every officer learned to study alien cultures with the same intensity they applied to weapons training. "Sir, we have detailed intelligence on every species that will be present at this meeting," he said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had spent years preparing for this moment. "The Kethtar warrior caste will likely demand immediate submission. The Valthan Empire prefers economic pressure over direct confrontation. The Nebula Collective thinks in terms of centuries rather than years." Taman nodded slowly, processing the information with the calculating mind of a strategist who had never lost a campaign. He understood that this summons was not really about him at all. It was about the fear that had been growing in alien hearts as they watched humanity spread across the stars with unstoppable determination. "They want to see what kind of species they are dealing with," he said, setting down the data pad with deliberate care. "They have heard stories about human persistence and aggression, but they need to see for themselves whether we are predators or prey." Engineer Yang Ming-yu looked up from his console where streams of data showed the status of every human ship in the fleet. The numbers told a story of technological advancement that had surprised even humanity's allies. In less than 2 centuries, humans had gone from primitive chemical rockets to ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks. "Admiral, our fleet is at full readiness," Yang reported. "All weapons systems are operational, and our defensive screens are at maximum efficiency. We can protect you from any threat the Council might present." But Taman was already shaking his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The expression was not one of amusement, but of anticipation, like a hunter who had finally found worthy prey after a long search. "No," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had made him the youngest admiral in human history. "I will go alone, exactly as they requested. But first, I want every ship in this fleet to power down their weapons systems completely." The bridge erupted in protests from his senior staff. Captain Nara's image flickered with static as she raised her voice in objection. Commander Jiho stepped forward as if to physically prevent his admiral from making such a dangerous decision. "Sir, that would leave us completely defenseless," Jiho said, his training warring with his desire to protect the man who had led humanity through a dozen successful campaigns. "If the Council decides to attack while you are away, we would be helpless to respond." Taman stood up from his chair, his tall frame casting shadows across the tactical displays. His uniform was simple and unadorned except for the single star. That marked his rank, but his presence filled the bridge like a force of nature. "They expect us to be afraid," he said, his words carrying across the communication channels to every human ship in the fleet. "They think that by threatening me, they can make humanity submit to their authority. They believe we are just another species that can be controlled through intimidation." He walked to the main viewport where the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere among those distant lights waited the aliens who thought they could humble the human race with ceremonies and demands. "Let them see what humanity really is," Taman continued, his reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass. "Let them understand that we do not need weapons to be dangerous. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing exactly how much power you possess and choosing not to use it." The shuttle bay doors opened with mechanical precision as Admiral Lee Taman walked toward his small transport vessel. Behind him, the crew of the Defiance watched their leader prepare to face the combined might of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. As his shuttle detached from the massive warship, every human vessel in the fleet powered down their weapons in perfect synchronization. To the alien observers monitoring from hidden positions, it looked like an act of submission. They could not have been more wrong. The Galactic Council chamber stretched upward like the inside of a massive cathedral, its walls carved from living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. 12 different atmospheric zones maintained perfect environmental conditions for each member species, creating a rainbow of colored gases that swirled through the air like aurora. The architecture itself was designed to overwhelm visitors, to make them feel small and insignificant before the combined power of ancient civilizations. High Counselor Thys floated in her containment field, her gaseous form shifting between shades of purple and gold as she prepared to address the assembly. The Nebula Collective had ruled over vast sectors of space for millennia, their energy-based consciousness allowing them to think on timescales that organic beings could barely comprehend. Around her, representatives from 11 other major civilizations took their positions in arrangements that spoke of power and hierarchy. The insectoid Kethtar delegation clicked their mandibles in anticipation, their exoskeletons gleaming like polished obsidian in the chamber's light. These warrior philosophers had conquered 300 worlds through disciplined military campaigns and rigid social order. Their compound eyes reflected the light in patterns that conveyed complex emotions, invisible to most other species. Counselor. Thys began the session with words that had been carefully prepared over weeks of secret meetings. Her voice resonated through translation devices that converted her electromagnetic fluctuations into sounds that organic beings could understand. "We gather today to address a growing threat to galactic stability," she announced, her form brightening with each word. "The species calling themselves human has engaged in unauthorized expansion, established colonies without proper permits, and refused to acknowledge the authority of this council." The Valthan Empire's crystal formations chimed in harmony, their bioluminescent cores pulsing with agreement. These silicon-based beings had built their civilization on trade and economic control, preferring to dominate through resource manipulation rather than direct military force. Their representative, a towering spire of living mineral, spoke with the voice of accumulated centuries. The humans have disrupted established trade routes and ignored territorial agreements that have maintained peace for thousands of years, the Valthan declared, its crystalline structure ringing like distant bells. They expand without regard for existing claims or traditional boundaries. The other representatives nodded their agreement in whatever manner their anatomy allowed. The Zephyrians shifted their wing patterns in patterns of approval. The aquatic, deep-sworn sent bubbles of bioluminescence through their containment tanks. Even the mechanical construct collective transmitted data bursts that expressed their concern about human unpredictability. Admiral Lee Tamen's shuttle requested permission to dock exactly 1 hour after the session began. The timing was precise, to the minute, neither early enough to seem eager nor late enough to appear disrespectful. The aliens interpreted this as evidence of human anxiety, another sign that their psychological pressure was working exactly as planned. The shuttle bay. Cameras showed a single human male emerging from a modest transport vessel. He wore a simple military uniform with minimal decoration, carried no visible weapons, and walked with the measured pace of someone who was either very confident or very good at hiding fear. The aliens watching the feeds could not tell which. Dr. Yuhana observed the proceedings from her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by displays that showed real-time biometric data from every alien in the council chamber. Her teams had spent decades developing sensors that could read the emotional states of dozens of different species, and the information flowing across her screens told a fascinating story. Elevated stress hormones across all observed species, she reported to her research team through encrypted channels. Fear responses are elevated but being carefully controlled. They want to appear confident while dealing with an unknown threat. Back in the council chamber, the massive doors dilated to admit Admiral Tamen. He entered alone, his footsteps echoing in the vast space as he walked toward the center of the circular floor. The aliens towered above him on their elevated platforms, some standing 3 times his height, others filling volumes of space that could contain entire buildings. The human looked small and vulnerable in the massive chamber, exactly as the council had intended. They had studied human psychology and believed that overwhelming size and numbers would trigger submission responses. They expected him to show fear, to demand legal representation, or to attempt negotiation from a position of obvious weakness. Instead, Admiral Tamen simply stood in the center of the chamber and waited. His posture was relaxed but alert, like someone who was completely comfortable in his surroundings. His dark eyes moved slowly across the assembled aliens, not with the rapid glances of someone seeking escape routes, but with the patient observation of someone taking careful inventory. High Counselor Theiss began reading the formal charges in the ceremonial manner that the council preferred. Her words rolled through the chamber like thunder, each accusation building upon the last to create an overwhelming case for human submission. The species known as human stands accused of unauthorized territorial expansion, she declared, her gaseous form swirling with increased agitation. 17 colonies established without council permits. 43 trade agreements negotiated outside established protocols. Military buildup in contested sectors without diplomatic notification. The charges continued for 20 minutes, each one carefully documented and presented with the weight of galactic law behind it. The aliens had assembled evidence spanning decades of human activity, building a case that seemed overwhelming in its scope and detail. Lieutenant Choi Min-ho monitored the proceedings from the human embassy, his communications equipment hidden within diplomatic luggage that the aliens had politely declined to search. The young officer's job was to observe and report, but what he saw in the biometric readings made his hands shake as he transmitted data back to Earth. Dr. Yu, the stress. Indicators are spiking across all species, he reported in whispered words that his equipment converted to encrypted data streams. Something is happening that they did not expect. Admiral Tamen had not moved during the entire presentation of charges. He stood perfectly still in the center of the chamber, his breathing slow and steady, his expression neutral but alert. The Aliens began to realize that their carefully planned intimidation tactics were having no visible effect on their target. When High Counselor Theiss finished reading the charges, she waited for the humans' response. The Council expected him to request time to contact Earth, to demand legal representation, or to begin the process of negotiation that would lead to humanity's submission to galactic authority. Admiral Taman sat down on the simple chair that had been provided for him and remained silent for exactly 60 seconds. The silence stretched through the chamber like a living thing, growing heavier with each passing moment. The aliens shifted uncomfortably on their platforms, unused to such deliberate disregard for protocol. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet but carried clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "I need to contact my government to discuss terms of surrender." The aliens relaxed visibly, their stress indicators dropping as they heard what they interpreted as the beginning of human capitulation. High Counselor Theiss brightened with satisfaction, her gaseous form taking on golden hues that indicated pleasure and triumph. "You have 1 hour to establish communication with Earth and arrange the terms of your species' submission to Council authority," she announced, her electromagnetic voice carrying notes of victory. "During this time, you will remain in this chamber, under observation." Admiral Taman nodded politely and activated a small communication device that the aliens had permitted him to carry. The device appeared to be a standard diplomatic communicator, the type used for routine government business. What the aliens did not know was that every word spoken in the chamber was being transmitted to human intelligence networks across the galaxy. Captain Song Hyejin received the transmission aboard the science vessel Darwin's Dream, where her crew had been monitoring alien communications for weeks. Her ship specialized in intelligence gathering, and her people had become experts at reading between the lines of alien diplomatic language. "Admiral Taman is playing his role perfectly," she reported to the Human Intelligence Network. "The aliens believe they have achieved victory before the real confrontation has even begun." The hour passed slowly, with Admiral Taman sitting in apparent consultation with his government while the aliens waited with growing confidence. They discussed among themselves how to divide human territory, what tribute to demand, and which human colonies to allow to remain independent as a show of council mercy. Major Kang Siwoo monitored these discussions from his position at the Human Military Academy, where teams of linguists and cultural experts translated every word and gesture. The intelligence being gathered would prove invaluable in the coming confrontation, but more importantly, it revealed exactly how little the aliens truly understood about the species they thought they were about to humble. They still think this is about territory and resources. Admiral Lee Taman spoke one word that changed the course of galactic history. No, the simple refusal hit the council chamber like a physical force, creating ripples of confusion and disbelief among the assembled aliens. High Counselor Theiss's gaseous form flickered with shock, cycling through colors that indicated emotions ranging from surprise to outrage. The word hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before gods who had never been defied. "Explain yourself," Theiss demanded, her electromagnetic voice crackling with indignation. "You have spent an hour consulting with your government. Surely they understand the consequences of refusing council authority." Taman began walking slowly around the center of the chamber, his footsteps creating a steady rhythm that somehow seemed louder than it should be. His movement was deliberate and controlled, like a predator circling prey, though none of the aliens understood why that comparison suddenly filled their minds. "My government understands perfectly," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the vast space. "They understand that you believe humanity can be intimidated into submission through displays of power and threats of consequences." The Kethtar warrior delegate chittered with aggressive patterns, its mandibles clicking, in rhythms that conveyed battle readiness. The insectoid had conquered worlds through disciplined military campaigns and had never encountered a species that did not respond appropriately to demonstrations of superior force. "Human, you stand alone before the combined might of 12 civilizations," the Kethtar declared, its compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light in fractal patterns. "Your species is young and weak compared to empires that have existed for millennia. Submit now, and your people may survive as vassals, Admiral Taman. Stopped walking and turned to face the Kethtar representative directly. What happened next would be discussed in alien military academies for generations to come, though few who witnessed it could ever adequately explain what they had seen. The humans simply looked at the alien warrior. It was not an aggressive stare, or a fearful glance, or any of the typical responses that species displayed when confronted by superior force. It was something far more primitive and terrifying than conscious aggression. It was the calm, measuring gaze of a natural predator evaluating whether something was worth the energy required to kill it. The Kethtar took a step backward. The movement was involuntary and instinctive, triggered by recognition patterns that existed far below the level of conscious thought. For the first time in its warrior existence, the Kethtar found itself facing something that its genetic memory identified as a superior predator. Dr. Yu Hana watched the biometric readings spike across her displays on Earth, her research team scrambling to record data that should not have been possible. Every alien in the chamber was showing classic prey responses to predator presence, despite the fact that they were the ones with superior numbers and defensive positions. "This is extraordinary," she whispered to her colleagues, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was observing. Every species is registering threat responses to a single unarmed human. The stress hormones are off the charts. Admiral Taman continued his slow circuit of the chamber, making eye contact with each alien representative in turn. The Valthan Empire's crystal formation dimmed its bioluminescence as if trying to become less visible. The aquatic deep-sworn retreated deeper into their containment tanks. Even the Mechanical Construct Collective reduced their operational output in what could only be interpreted as defensive behavior. Lieutenant Choi Minho monitored the scene from the human embassy, his training barely adequate to help him understand what he was witnessing. The young officer had studied alien psychology for years, but nothing in his education had prepared him for the sight of galactic powers cowering before a single human's attention. "Dr. Yu, the fear responses are consistent across all observed species," he reported, his voice tight with amazement. "Whatever Admiral Taman is doing, it is triggering instinctive recognition of threat in beings that have never encountered humans before. The answer lay in millions of years of evolutionary history that the aliens could not possibly understand. Humans had evolved on a death world where survival required outcompeting the most efficient predators in the galaxy. Every human carried genetic memories of ancestors who had tracked prey across impossible distances, who had outlasted creatures stronger and faster than themselves, who had climbed to the apex of the most competitive ecosystem in known space. Captain Kim Nara observed from the Soul's Pride, her ship's sensors locked onto the Council station despite being positioned light minutes away. Her crew watched the tactical displays that showed every alien vessel in the system, noting how their defensive screens had been quietly activated despite the supposedly peaceful nature of the diplomatic meeting. "The aliens are afraid," she reported to her fellow captains across the human fleet. "Their ships are taking defensive positions even though our weapons are powered down. They recognize a threat that they cannot consciously identify." Admiral Taman reached the center of the chamber again and stopped, his dark eyes sweeping across the assembled representatives one final time. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of a species that had spent 10 million years learning how to hunt. "You wanted to meet humanity's representative," he said, his voice quiet but somehow filling the enormous space. "You are looking at him." High Counselor Theiss attempted to regain control of the situation, her gaseous form swirling with patterns that indicated confusion and growing alarm. The Nebula Collective prided themselves on their ability to think in terms of geological time scales. But they had never encountered a species that could project such immediate and personal threat. "You are one being against thousands," she declared, her electromagnetic voice wavering with uncertainty. "Your ships are defenseless, and your colonies are scattered across sectors that we control. What possible threat could you represent, Taman?" Smiled again, and this time several aliens actually fled from the chamber. The expression was not cruel or aggressive, but carried the terrible patience of something that had all the time in the universe to achieve its goals. It was the smile of a persistence hunter who knew that everything else would eventually tire, eventually make mistakes, eventually fall. "The threat is not what I might do to you," he said, his words creating silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. "The threat is what I represent. You have spent this entire meeting trying to understand humanity through the lens of your own civilizations. You assume we think like you, that we respond to the same stimuli, that we can be controlled. Through the same methods you use on each other, Major Kang Siwoo transmitted real-time analysis from the Human Military Academy, where xenobiologists and strategic planners worked frantically to document the unprecedented diplomatic breakthrough occurring before their eyes. The aliens were learning something about humanity that no amount of intelligence gathering could have taught them. The fear responses are universal across all observed species," he reported to his superiors. "Admiral Taman is demonstrating predator recognition patterns that transcend individual biology. Every alien in that chamber knows they are looking at something that evolved to hunt." The Zephyrian representative attempted to spread its wings in a dominance display, but the gesture fell flat as its flight membranes trembled with involuntary fear responses. The graceful aerial species had ruled the skies of 100 worlds, but had never encountered anything that made them want to fold their wings and hide. Engineer Yang Mingyu monitored the human fleet from his position aboard the Defiance, watching as every ship maintained its powered-down status despite the obvious tension developing around the council station. The demonstration of restraint was perhaps more terrifying to the aliens than any display of weapons would have been. "Sir, alien scanning beams are intensifying," he reported to his commanding officers. "They are trying to determine if our weapons are actually offline, or if this is some kind of deception." But Admiral Taman was not finished. He walked closer to the elevated platforms where the alien representatives maintained their positions, and something in his movement made ancient instincts scream warnings that civilization had tried to silence. "You study us and see a young species that has only recently achieved spaceflight," he continued, his voice carrying the certainty of absolute truth. "You observe our expansion and assume it is random or chaotic. You watch our military development and believe it represents typical, aggressive tendencies." The chamber had become completely silent, except for the sound of his footsteps and the increasingly frantic operation of alien life support systems as stress responses triggered emergency protocols across 12 different biologies. "You are wrong about everything," Taman said, stopping directly beneath the Kethtar platform and looking up at the warrior-caste alien with eyes that had seen the death of stars. "We are not a young species learning to navigate galactic politics. We are an old species that has finally found something worth hunting." The Kethtar warrior, bred for combat across 1,000 battlefields, began to shake. Dr. Yuhana's displays showed biometric readings that seemed impossible. The council chamber erupted into chaos as the implications of Admiral Taman's words sank into alien minds that had never considered themselves prey. High Counselor Theis's gaseous form swirled through violent color changes that indicated panic and rage, while the Kethtar warrior delegate made chittering sounds that its species had not produced since their homeworld's prehistoric era. "Guards, arrest this human," Theis commanded, her electromagnetic voice crackling with authority that barely concealed desperation. "He threatens the established order of galactic civilization." But none of the alien guards moved toward Admiral Taman. The various security forces represented in the chamber stood frozen at their posts, their bodies locked in place by instincts that screamed warnings about approaching something that their genetic memories identified as a superior predator. Weapons were drawn but not aimed. Defensive positions were taken but not advanced from. Dr. Yuhana's voice crackled through hidden communication devices that Lieutenant Choi Minho had positioned throughout the chamber during the preliminary diplomatic meetings. Her transmission cut through the alien panic with scientific precision that made the situation even more terrifying for those who understood its implications. "What you are experiencing is not a conscious threat," her words echoed through the chamber, translated into dozens of alien languages by communication equipment that the Council had failed to detect. "Admiral Taman has made no aggressive moves and carries no weapons. Your fear responses are being triggered by recognition patterns that exist far below the level of conscious thought." The Valthan representative attempted to restore order through economic reasoning, its crystalline structure chiming with harmonic frequencies designed to project calm authority. "Dr. Yuhana, your species cannot possibly understand the complexity of galactic civilization," Humans have existed in space for less than 3 centuries while our empires span millennia. But Yuhana's response revealed knowledge that made the aliens realize how thoroughly they had underestimated humanity's intelligence-gathering capabilities. Valthan Prime established its first off-world colony 4,147 standard years ago, she said, her voice carrying data that should have been classified at the highest levels. Your silicon-based biology requires specific mineral compositions found on only 12 worlds within your current territory. Your expansion has been limited by resource availability, not military opposition. Captain Song Hyejin's image materialized on displays throughout the chamber as the science vessel Darwin's Dream transmitted detailed intelligence files that human observers had compiled over decades of careful study. The data streams showed trade routes, military capabilities, population distributions, and strategic vulnerabilities for every major galactic civilization. The Kethtar warrior caste maintains ritual combat protocols that prioritize honor over tactical efficiency, Song reported, her words accompanied by video footage of alien military exercises that should have been impossible for humans to observe. Their hive mind decision-making process requires 17 minutes to achieve tactical consensus, making them vulnerable to rapid strategic changes. The Mechanical Construct Collective transmitted data bursts of protest, their artificial intelligences struggling to process information that revealed human capabilities far beyond what their calculations had predicted. Impossible computational requirements, they declared through speakers that crackled with static. Human civilization lacks the technological infrastructure to gather such comprehensive intelligence. Major Kang Siwoo appeared on the main display screens, his image transmitted from the Human Military Academy, where alien languages and cultures were studied with obsessive intensity. Behind him, walls covered with tactical analyses and cultural assessments created a visual representation of how thoroughly humans understood their galactic neighbors. Every human military officer studies xenobiology, alien psychology, and cultural analysis as mandatory curriculum, he explained, his words creating stunned silence among the assembled aliens. We know your mating rituals, your religious ceremonies, your economic systems, and your military doctrines better than most of your own citizens do. The truth was beginning to dawn on the alien representatives, and it was more terrifying than any direct military threat could have been. Humanity had not stumbled blindly into galactic civilization as they had assumed. Instead, humans had been studying, cataloging, and analyzing every aspect of alien society with the patient thoroughness of natural predators preparing for a hunt. Admiral Taman walked slowly around the chamber again, his movement creating a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the heartbeats of every organic being present. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of revelations that would reshape galactic understanding of human nature. You believe that our expansion pattern is chaotic because you judge it by your own territorial instincts, he said, his voice cutting through the alien panic like a blade through silk. You see random colony placement because you do not understand persistence hunting strategies. You observe our trade negotiations and assume we are inexperienced because we do not follow your established protocols. Director Oh Tae-hyun materialized through holographic projection, his image transmitted from the Human Diplomatic Corps headquarters on Earth. The facility behind him showed walls covered with detailed maps of galactic civilization, marked with information that revealed decades of careful observation and analysis. Human expansion follows classic persistence hunting patterns, he explained, his academic tone making the words even more chilling. We establish colonies at strategic intervals along migration routes used by other species. We monitor resource flows and identify choke points in established trade networks. We position ourselves to observe and intercept any movement of strategic importance. The aquatic deep sworn retreated further into their containment tanks, their bioluminescent communications flickering with patterns that indicated existential terror. As a species that had evolved as both predator and prey, they possessed instincts that recognized the hunting strategies being described. The humans have been hurting us, the deep-sworn delegate transmitted through translation equipment that converted their chemical signals into audible words. Every diplomatic contact, every trade agreement, every territorial negotiation has been designed to position their species for optimal strategic advantage. Captain Lee Sujin appeared on subsidiary screens, her transmission coming from the deep, space reconnaissance fleet that operated beyond the edges of known galactic territory. Her ships had been monitoring threats that the galactic civilizations did not even know existed, gathering intelligence on dangers that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. Our long-range sensors have detected anomalous signals from beyond the galactic rim, she reported, her words creating a new dimension of fear among the alien representatives. 3 massive objects approaching from intergalactic space, estimated arrival in 18 standard months. Energy signatures consistent with artificial construction on a scale that exceeds anything in our current database. The implications hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. While they had been focused on maintaining their established hierarchies and territorial disputes, humanity had been watching for threats that none of them had considered. The humans had been acting as an early warning system for the entire galaxy without anyone realizing it. Engineer Yang Mingyu transmitted power readings from the human fleet, showing that every ship maintained its weapons in powered-down status despite the escalating tension. The demonstration of restraint was more terrifying than any display of military might could have been. Human vessels carry energy weapons capable of destabilizing stellar cores, he reported matter-of-factly, as if discussing weather patterns. Kinetic projectiles that can achieve relativistic velocities through gravitational slingshot maneuvers. Defensive screens that can deflect directed energy weapons by creating localized spatial distortions. The Zephyrian representative attempted to spread its wings in a final gesture of defiance, but the movement was half-hearted and trembling. Even if your military capabilities exceed our estimates, you are still outnumbered by factors of thousands. Our combined fleets could overwhelm any human resistance through simple numerical superiority. Admiral Taman stopped walking and looked directly at the Zephyrian with eyes that carried the accumulated wisdom of a species that had learned to survive by outthinking rather than overpowering their opponents. When he spoke, his words carried the certainty of mathematical proof. "You are thinking like prey animals," he said, his voice gentle but utterly implacable. "You assume that conflict resolution requires overwhelming force applied to obvious targets. You believe that victory comes from destroying enemy military assets and occupying territory." The chamber fell silent as every alien representative realized that they were about to learn something fundamental about human nature that would change their understanding of warfare itself. "We do not fight wars to destroy enemies," Taman continued, his words echoing in the vast space like prophecy. "We fight wars to solve problems, and the most efficient way to solve a problem is to make it go away permanently." The silence in the council chamber stretched like a living thing, heavy with the weight of revelations that had shattered millennia of established galactic order. Admiral Lee Taman stood in the center of the vast space, surrounded by alien representatives, who had finally understood what they were truly dealing with. The fear responses had faded into something deeper and more complex, recognition of a fundamental shift in the balance of power that would reshape civilization itself. "High Counselor." Thais was the first to speak, her gaseous form cycling through colors that indicated careful consideration rather than panic. The Nebula Collective had survived for millions of years by adapting to changing circumstances, and her electromagnetic voice carried the weight of species-wide consensus when she addressed the human admiral. "What do you want from us?" she asked, the question carrying implications that extended far beyond simple diplomatic negotiation. The words acknowledged something that no galactic power had ever been forced to admit, that another species now held the advantage in a game that they had thought they controlled. Admiral Taman walked to the great viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber, his reflection ghostly in the transparent aluminum that looked out upon the stars. When he spoke, his words carried the calm certainty of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of the current situation. "We want what we have always wanted," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the enormous space. "We want to hunt worthy prey and face challenges that test our capabilities. For the first time since leaving Earth, we have found both." Director Oh Tai-hyun appeared on the main display screens, his holographic image transmitted from diplomatic headquarters, where human negotiators had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Behind him, walls covered with strategic analyses showed the scope of planning that had gone into this confrontation. "The Galactic Council represents the largest single organization in known space," he explained, his academic tone making the words seem like a lecture rather than a negotiation. Your combined resources, territorial holdings, and military capabilities represent exactly the kind of complex challenge that humanity was designed to solve. The Kethtar warrior delegate chittered with patterns that indicated confused aggression, its compound eyes reflecting light in fractal arrangements that betrayed deep uncertainty. You speak as if conquest was your goal from the beginning, yet you have made no aggressive moves against our territories. Captain Kim Nara materialized on secondary screens, her transmission coming from the Soul's Pride, where human tactical analysts had been monitoring alien responses throughout the diplomatic meeting. Her words carried the weight of military expertise applied to strategic problems that transcended simple battlefield considerations. Conquest implies taking something that belongs to someone else, she said, her voice carrying the practical tone of someone explaining obvious facts. We are not interested in ruling your territories or controlling your populations. We are interested in testing ourselves against opponents who might actually present meaningful resistance. The Mechanical Construct Collective transmitted data bursts that crackled with confused calculations, their artificial intelligences struggling to process motivations that did not fit any recognizable pattern. Clarification required, they declared through speakers that buzzed with static. Human objectives do not correspond to established territorial or resource acquisition models. Dr. Yuhana appeared on the displays, her image transmitted from research facilities where xenobiologists had spent decades studying the fundamental drives that motivated different species. Her explanation cut through alien confusion with scientific precision that made human motivations even more terrifying. Most galactic civilizations expand to acquire resources, territory, or security, she said, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. Humans expand to find things worth hunting. Your combined civilizations represent the most complex and challenging opponent we have ever encountered. Captain Song Hyejin's transmission from the Darwin's Dream brought new data that shifted the entire context of the discussion. Her deep space reconnaissance vessels had been monitoring threats that the galactic civilizations had never detected, and her words carried urgency that made previous negotiations seem trivial. Long-range sensors confirm 3 massive objects approaching from intergalactic space, she reported, her voice tight with the excitement of someone who had found the ultimate challenge. Preliminary analysis suggests artificial construction on a scale that exceeds anything in our database. Estimated arrival time is now 16 months. The alien representatives stirred with new forms of fear as they realized that humanity had been monitoring threats beyond their detection capabilities. The implications were staggering, suggesting that human technology and strategic awareness operated on levels that made galactic civilization seem primitive by comparison. Lieutenant Choi Min-ho transmitted additional data from monitoring stations that had been observing the approaching objects for months, his young voice carrying the weight of discoveries that would reshape understanding of the universe itself. The objects are actively scanning star systems as they approach, he reported, his words creating stunned silence among the assembled aliens. They appear to be cataloging planetary positions, energy signatures, and technological development levels. This is not random movement, it is systematic reconnaissance. Admiral Taman turned away from the viewport and faced the assembled alien representatives with an expression that somehow combined threat and protection in a way that made their ancient instincts scream conflicting warnings. When he spoke, his words offered a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. You can continue to view humanity as a threat to your established order, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You can attempt to limit our expansion, control our activities, and force us to submit to your authority. If you choose this path, you will discover exactly what it means to be hunted by a species that evolved to never give up. The Valthan representative chimed with harmonic frequencies that indicated careful consideration, its crystalline structure, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that revealed complex calculations. What alternative do you offer? Major Kang Siwoo appeared on the tactical displays, his transmission showing strategic analyses that revealed the scope of the approaching threat. The data painted a picture of danger that made current territorial disputes seem like arguments between children. The approaching objects show energy signatures consistent with weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. he reported, his military training evident in the precise delivery of terrifying facts, defensive capabilities that could deflect anything in our current arsenal. If they represent hostile intent, no single civilization possesses the resources necessary for effective resistance. Director Oh Tae-hyun stepped forward in his holographic projection, his diplomatic experience evident in the way he presented options that seemed like choices, but were actually inevitabilities. Humanity offers an alliance of equals, rather than a hierarchy of submission. We propose to serve as the galaxy's immune system, the early warning network that detects and responds to threats that your established order cannot handle. Engineer Yang Mingyu transmitted power readings from the human fleet, showing how quickly their weapons could be brought online if circumstances required it. The demonstration was subtle but unmistakable, revealing capabilities that had been carefully hidden behind diplomatic restraint. Human vessels can achieve full combat readiness in 37 seconds, he reported matter-of-factly. Our fleet carries sufficient firepower to eliminate every military asset in this system within 6 minutes. We choose not to use these capabilities because we prefer cooperation to conquest. The aquatic deep swarm transmitted bioluminescent patterns that indicated species-wide consensus among their distributed intelligence network. Their words carried the weight of collective decision-making that spanned entire ocean worlds. The humans offer protection in exchange for cooperation rather than demanding submission in exchange for survival, they observed. Their chemical signals translated into words that carried both relief and resignation. This arrangement provides greater autonomy than our current relationship with the Council. Admiral Taemin walked back to the center of the chamber, his movement creating the same hypnotic rhythm that had earlier triggered prey responses in alien nervous systems. But now the effect was different, protective rather than threatening, like a guardian establishing the boundaries of safety rather than a predator marking hunting territory. The choice is simple, he said, his words carrying the finality of natural law. You can accept humanity as an ally and benefit from our protection when the real threat arrives. Or you can continue to view us as enemies and discover what it means to face both an external invasion and an internal uprising simultaneously. Captain Lee Soo-jin's final transmission brought data that made the choice even more stark, showing detailed analyses of the approaching objects that revealed capabilities beyond anything galactic civilization could hope to match. The 3 objects showed defensive screens capable of deflecting stellar energy, propulsion systems that operate outside known physics,